welcome viewers to this series of lectures on a new topic today, which is about forests, development and sustainability. And as in the previous part of this lecture, of which this one is a sequel, we spoke of the big picture of this issue, the timeline. So just to recap this quickly, we are concerned not with the deep history of forests and so forth. What we are talking about is Indian national movement, the way the national movement itself through two different paradigms of economic development to us, say in the early decades of the 20th century, and then how subsequently in independent India we pursued them with some consequences, with some results, and then there is a relook at it with the issue of sustainability coming in a big way. And so this is how the forest policies, our outlook to forests, the issue of development, economic development, and the issue of sustainability is dealt with in the recent past history of India. So in the previous part, we did discuss that the Indian national movement, through two distinct paradigms of economic development, one typified by the vision of Mahatma Gandhi, the other can be labeled as Nehruvian paradigm, which spoke of big industries and so forth as the motor of economic development and prosperity and so forth, whereas Gandhian paradigm is premised on pre-industrial and pre-colonial organic village society with the artisans and artisanal production added to it. So he is not very keen about big industries and massive factories as engines of growth and so forth. So this is these are the two paradigms that we spoke of in the previous part of the lecture. Also, we started discussing the Indian national movement and the role of Gandhi in that, in the sense that his arrival from South Africa in the second decade of the 20th century also marked the transformation of Indian national movement from somewhat elitist to a mass character, because he is reaching out to the peasantry, and it is here that his outlook for independent Indian economy and society is crystallizing by massive participation of village folk and also the peasantry in particular. We did refer to Champaran, Kheda and so forth, but also we started talking of the fact that there were several other economic groups and social communities that he had to take into account in his movement, trying to build an inclusive movement. And so there are indigenous entrepreneurs who had started doing well, not due to the intent of the British policymakers, but due to the exigencies of the First World War, where Britain is somewhat isolated and therefore had to reluctantly give concessions to Indian or indigenous entrepreneurs, and we did discuss that particularly in the segments of sugar, cement and paper industries, the formidable growth and mushrooming of industries could be seen in India. And it is this section that Gandhi is reaching out to, trying to build some bridges between the industrialists and the workers and peasantry and so forth. So these indigenous entrepreneurs, say like G.D. Birla and so forth, perceived that their aims were in congruence with Gandhi's doctrinal insistence on non-violence and the desire to avoid some kind of a tumultuous upheaval by mobilizing all social groups, say the landlords and the capitalists, against the British. So any massive, impactful movement would seek to reach out to all the groups, but their interests are antithetical to each other, not in sync with each other, and that goes to the credit of the leadership. That to what extent are you able to weave them together as some kind of a congruent trajectory of Indian national movement. And in this, you find that the indigenous entrepreneurs are also finding Gandhi's ideology and methods very handy, because it avoids violence. So Gandhi's insistence on ahimsa and his strategy, which forbade tumultuous upheaval in the name of Kranti, revolution and so forth, revolutionary change, that is something that Gandhi does not stand for. So it is this aspect of his leadership that appealed to the indigenous entrepreneurs as well. And more importantly, Gandhi, all of us know that he spoke of industrialists as the trustees of the workers, and therefore there is that kind of familiar, paternalistic kind of approach that the industrialists should have for the workers, and workers should also look at the industrialists not in class, antagonized class terms, but as their trustees. So this emphasis on trusteeship by Gandhi is coming very handy to the industrialists, and in fact the ambiguity associated with the idea of capitalists as trustees of the workers actually camouflaged the shrewd tactical support extended by industrialists to the Congress. Congress wanted industrialist support, and it sought to do that without antagonizing the workers or the peasantry. And what kind of ideology should be offered to get it happening is the idea of trusteeship, and the fact that there was some element of ambiguity associated with trusteeship, the idea of trusteeship, that actually helped the movement in hiding that you can say antagonism that characterized the interests of these two groups, the industrialists and the workers. Well, paradoxes apart, Gandhi's path of economic development was quickly laid redundant, because most Indian nationalists drew an entirely different conclusion from the colonial experience. So as I said, that there is a lot of morality, there is something sagely about Gandhian paradigm, there is that nostalgic go back to pre-industrial and pre-colonial village, organic village society, that kind of an appeal. And perhaps times had changed. This is 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, industrialization happening all across Europe, USSR coming into being with focus on big industries, 5-year plans and so forth, planned development wherever that much of capital is not there with private individuals. So it is the state that comes in as the major investor or capital provider by collecting taxes from its citizens, and that's socialist paradigm of economic development that we have as an option with the creation of the USSR and so forth. And all of us know that be it Nehru or even Subhash Chandra Bose, they are all drawn towards it. They are not in sync with Gandhian vision of of economic development for independent India. And the colonial experience and the changing times to the nationalists had given them a different lesson, and that was responsible, or that was a fact which laid Gandhian paradigm somewhat redundant so far as taking to a new economic paradigm of development in independent India is concerned. So what is this nationalist understanding of economic development that is developing as paradigm in contrast to the Gandhian paradigm that we otherwise understand as Nehruvian paradigm? They largely understood that India's subjugation was a consequence of its intellectual and economic backwardness. Primarily it had come because of the entry of the British as colonial masters. At the same time, they do contrasts of the Indian scenario, economic scenario, poverty, illiteracy, and so forth, lack of entrepreneurship, etc., with what they regarded as the dynamic West. So in terms of industrial enterprise and effort, certainly this binary was very much at work, that the West is dynamic because of industrialization, and the fact that India does not have those industries, therefore the growth trajectory is very slow. And therefore India, which at once was a great civilization, now had stagnated and atrophied under the dead weight of tradition. So the tradition-laden scenario is working as some kind of an inhibitor to the speed and acceleration that is required for changing it, right? So the traditional practices, the way Gandhi is visualizing it, is seen by this set of nationalist leaders as some kind of a dead weight, and that has to be done away with or modified significantly. And they also thought that its revitalization, civilizational revitalization, economic revitalization, social revitalization could come about only by emulating the West. Now, this emulation intellectually can be understood through the infusion of modern sciences, and in material terms, this emulation of the West could be through the adoption of large-scale industrialization. So that's where you have two different trajectories of economic development available to us, and as independent nation, at least theoretically, we could have embarked on either of the two models, either of the two trajectories. Nehru in particular is somewhat ambivalent in his admiration of the West for its industrial progress, but simultaneously he also experienced bitterness owing to colonial experience. So it's not as if it is an unqualified emulation of the West that these leaders are talking about. Of course, the colonial experience had left a lot of bitterness in their mind about the Western civilization, but looking at the economic or industrial progress part of it, certainly there is very much an admiration in their minds, in Nehru's mind, and that is revealed in his paradigm of economic development that was deployed during the first couple of decades of independent India, through 5-year plans and massive industrialization and so forth. We all have heard of the name of Visvesvaraya, the famous engineer, on whose name you can find several engineering marvels and installations in independent India as well. And he articulates this paradigm in a very, I would say, unambiguous terms. It's very categorical. So he is not mixing it up, or he's not making it sugar coated. He's just being categorical. He says that either you industrialize or perish. There is no other way one can match. If we think of a country which is self-reliant and which is developed and so forth, so if that is our aim, then we should industrialize. Otherwise, there is no way out. So it's a massive departure from what Gandhian paradigm is, and this idea of massive industrialization was institutionalized also in independent India in the second 5-year plan, where a lot of impetus was given to industrialization, and they also believed, particularly Vishwasaraya articulated it in very unambiguous terms, that underdevelopment is a consequence of insufficient technological progress. So technology is the key. Adopt new technology, develop new technology, devise it, if possible borrow it from somewhere, but deploy it to the betterment of Indian economy, to the betterment of Indian industrialization, and that is something that is also revealed through Mahalanobis plan, through 5-year plans, and the emphasis laid on technological progress and industrial progress. These are early influencing statements that I have cited just to make the two paradigms look very categorical and different from each other, Gandhian paradigm and the Nehruvian paradigm. At this point of time, the early years of independent India in terms of economic vision and social development and so forth, progress, development, etc. Cases of, say, Meiji Japan, all of us know about the Meiji restoration in Japanese history, which is associated with massive industrialization and technological upgradation, etc. Stalinist Russia, Bismarckian Germany, they were all cited as exemplars of state-induced industrialization. So certainly we were not a rich country, and there weren't very many indigenous entrepreneurs who could deploy their capital to industrialize India. So such state efforts towards massive industrialization is what is cited as examples during that point of time. And during the advanced phase of Indian struggle for independence, we also hear of the Bombay Plan of 1944. This is in the middle of the Second World War, and the British again are cornered, and therefore there is some kind of a gain of momentum by the struggle by the Indian nationalist leaders, and Bombay Plan is associated with the industrial class of India, where they agree in effect to the idea of a strong centralized state once we acquire independence. So there is this silent consensus amongst the industrialists of India that when we become independent, we would have a strong centralized state. And why are they doing this? Because they think that a strong centralized state can induce industrialization better, can provide capital better, can ensure law and order, and can ensure some tumultuous transformation of things, and it can avoid conflicts, class conflicts, etc. So that's the idea that's getting embedded in the struggle for Indian independence itself. It also argued for adoption of most modern technologies, although on the flip side one can see that at this point of time little regard was paid to the social or ecological consequences of this massive deployment of modern technology, and everything centered around upping the growth and not thinking of the issue of sustainability. Of course, at that point of time, it was not that much an issue on account of the scale of production, but as it gained momentum, as it all became technology centric, as it all became capital centric, obviously the scale of operations that is being spoken of became very high, and the issue of depletion of resources, particularly that of forests, say timber and several other minerals, water table, these became an issue, and also habilitation of people, I mean those tribes and communities who were traditionally forest dwellers. At this point of time, we don't see much of a concern here, because everything is geared towards technology upgradation, modernization, development, and so forth. So one can pause and just think that at this point of time, right at the cusp of Indian independence, there are several options just in theory. I mean, these are theoretical things. I mean, they were not options kept on table to choose from by the planners, but theoretically, as a sovereign country, one could have adopted whichever paradigm, but what could have been adopted and what was adopted, just taking that stock of the situation, one can say that at the cusp of independence, these adopted technologies could have been either capital or labor intensive. Since population was an issue for us, we never felt that we don't have enough number of people in our country, etc. So we could have adopted labor intensive technology instead of capital intensive technologies, although in terms of optimizing these technologies for growth purpose would have been little bit of a challenge, but the ultimate objective of giving livelihood, sources of livelihood to people, could have been served. Similarly, it could have been oriented towards luxury goods or basic needs of the masses. So obviously, luxury good production will require more capital, but it will also ensure more profit margin for the investor. So it's a better lure for the investor or the entrepreneur, but in terms of serving the needs of the masses, of course, its utility for meeting the requirements of the masses are limited. Similarly, it could have been environmentally degrading or non-polluting. The technologies adopted could have been environmentally degrading or non-polluting. We could have been conscious of non-polluting dimension of the deployed technology instead of being blind to it. Gandhian paradigm, it's important to remind here, Gandhian paradigm is having a safety valve against it, is designed in a way where these things are intrinsically sustainable. So if you think of organic village society, so the scale of production would be limited. The demand for items would also be limited, and therefore there will not be any situation for massive deployment of advanced technologies and industrialization in the process of production. Similarly, the strategy could have used energy intensively or sparingly. I mean, one way of looking at all these developmental paradigms is to look at it through energy sourcing, and whether any technology is energy intensive or it uses energy at a minimal level. For example, animate sources of energy has its own limitation. whereas hydrocarbons or carbon fuel related energy sourcing will be of a scale altogether different. It could have used countries' endowment of natural resources in a sustainable manner or liquidate them. So these are the options available, at least theoretically, to our leaders right at the cusp of Indian independence, and the policies, the programs, the paradigm that we chose for ourselves, that is what we shall be talking about, particularly with reference to forests and other developmental issues and resources and energy, etc. That is what we shall be talking about further in the next set of lectures with you on this very theme. Thank you.